Oops. Oops. All right. Counsel, we're gonna, did you want to say something, Mr. Gray? All right. Counsel, we're gonna, did you want to say something, Mr.
I'm
Gray?
behind plexiglass.
Okay. All right. If you're speaking, you can take your mask off.
I'm behind plexiglass.
Okay.
All right.
If you're
through this page
okay,
by
if you're
page.
speaking, you can take your
Okay.
mask off.
We
Okay.
have our most recent draft, the one Zach sent you. Anything on page 1? Page 2. Page 3. Page 4. Okay, page 5. Okay, now we're at page 6. Do we need a superseding cause instruction? It is in here. I was just wondering if it's at all applicable. Okay.
What I understand the argument's going to be is that by fleeing, he's the cause. It can't, as a matter of law, be superseding. Of the
Right.
events. A superseding cause is not necessary.
Okay, I'm gonna keep it in, okay? Anything on 7 that you want to object to? This is... Okay, now we're at 8. And I've changed down at the bottom. I've struck affirmative defense and just left it at defense. The jury's not going to understand what affirmative is or isn't. So it'll say defense hyphen authorized use of deadly force by a police officer.
No. The version I have, Your Honor, does say affirmative, so you're taking that out.
We're taking out affirmative because nobody understands what that means. All right. And I think the state wanted to be heard on my change to the standard instruction on the kind and degree of force. The standard instruction did not have the hindsight language, which is in the standard instruction for non-deadly force. Or has the state withdrawn its objection?
No, Your Honor, if I can take a look at that.
Sure.
So the state's position, Your Honor, is, first of all, that the use of non-deadly force instruction should not be given. I realize we're not at that point yet. But the hindsight language, we oppose the inclusion of that. And so if we're looking at page 9 of the proposed instructions, that last full paragraph, there is a sentence about halfway down that says the reasonableness of the particular use of force must be judged from the perspective of a reasonable officer on the scene, rather than with the benefit of hindsight, taking into consideration split-second judgments, tense, uncertain, and rapidly evolving. I think we all are familiar now with that language. It's that language, Your Honor, that we feel the court should not include. Prior to that sentence, maybe I'm doing this backwards, is the sentence that says to determine whether or not the actions of the police officer are necessary, you must look at those facts known to the police officer at the precise moment she acted with force. We think that's appropriate and that's an accurate statement of the law. All that follows is simply repeating that same concept, that, in other words, that we're limited to looking at what the officer knew at the time and is unnecessary language, because that's already included in the instruction. That language is, we have testimony from Professor Snowden and I think might have been Mr. Himes or one of the trainers anyway that explained that 2020 hindsight language is about that very concept. You can't look at facts that occur afterwards. My central issue continues to be with this additional language that comes out of appellate decisions in immunity cases where the appellate court is essentially telling the lower courts in granting or denying immunity, you can't be looking at these things that we know or learn later. And so their appellate language, I get it, they're an appellate opinion, and that's probably why they end up with a jig. But the reason I think they're inappropriate for a district court jury instruction is because they have the force of the court's authority behind them, and they're singling out specific facts for the jurors to consider. And that's why that additional language is improper in addition to being unnecessary. It's just a way of saying, also consider these things. So in other words, when we have a jury instruction on impeachment, the court gives, hey, you could consider some of these things, but we don't go forward and say people who use drugs are not as reliable. You know what I mean? We don't tell them how to think about certain things. And that's what I think this language does and is improper. My feeling that what probably happened is the writers of the jigs saw that language in the opinion and included it. Our position is it's unnecessary and actually improper to add it. That is our objection to that language.
Okay. Mr. Ng.
Are we persistent in its inclusion? We had a discussion about this in chambers. This is consistent with Graham versus Connor, and we would prefer them ask you to keep this language in as it is.
Okay. Two things. First of all, the U.S. Supreme Court has specifically stated that this is an appropriate consideration and determine reasonableness. And number two, it is the standard jig for non-deadly force. And I'm just using the same standard in the deadly force instruction. So that hindsight language is already part of the standard jig for non-deadly force, but not for deadly force. There's no reason why it shouldn't be in the deadly force instruction. Okay, state's objection noted. And then number 10, at the top, the title should be use of non-deadly force, and strike authorize and strike defined. Then I like the state's suggestion on explaining this taser use. Did you get a copy of the state's? Okay.
We did get a copy of it.
All right. They're saying in this case you have heard testimony about whether, first of all, is the state objecting to any instruction on non-deadly force?
We are, Your Honors, as we argued before, the only use of force at issue in the case is the firing of the gun, which clearly is deadly force. And so we continue to take the position that the jury should not receive an instruction on the use of non-deadly force.
Okay, and I've overruled that objection because the state's expert stated that the use of the taser was unreasonable and inappropriate. So the state's expert really made it an issue. So, Mr. Ng?
Yes. Well, you read the state's proposal. We would object to the first sentence of the state's proposal and the last sentence, and then we made the balance of the instruction in.
Your Honor, I'm not going to argue that the authorized use of non-deadly force is a defense at all. I might argue about it, talking about Professor Stoughton, Mr. Professor Stoughton, but I'm not gonna claim that it's unnecessary. I mean, if I do, are you gonna instruct before or after the arguments?
Before. Okay, and, I like the state's language. In this case, you have heard testimony about whether the defendant's apparent decision to use a taser was reasonable or appropriate. I think that's accurate. And I would go down to the statutes of Minnesota provide that a police officer is authorized to use reasonable force in the line of duty, period. Well, you are instructed that executing a lawful arrest warrant is a duty imposed on officers by law. That's so subparts 1 through 4 are just duplicative and confusing. So there'd be a period after line of duty, and we would strike 1, 2, 3, and 4 and go straight to you're instructed that executing a lawful arrest warrant is a duty imposed on officers by law. And then the standard instruction on reasonable force. And I also like the state's suggestion on the explanation. Whether the defendant's apparent decision to use a taser was reasonable or appropriate is not a defense to the charges in this case.
It's not an absolute defense, because the evidence entered into this case, and this professor said that that was a violation too. So, I just think that if you're going to comment on it, but is whether the defendant's apparent decision to use a taser was reasonable or appropriate is something you may not consider in order, leave alone.
Okay. Are you withdrawing your comments? Are we okay with the state's proposal then?
I'm in a state of confusion.
What? The actual language, whether the defendant's apparent decision to use a taser was reasonable or appropriate, is not a defense to the charges in this case.
What I can argue is that her decision was appropriate as far as she was concerned.
Yeah. Yeah. You can argue that she could use a taser under the circumstances.
I do have a question.
But you can't say that she's not guilty of either charge because the use of the taser was appropriate.
Yeah, it shows circumstantial evidence that she was in good faith, that she wasn't intentionally doing anything.
Well, okay, you can't argue that it's a defense. You can't say she's. Yeah.
I'm going to argue that Mr. Stoughton said that in his incredible opinion, he said that even what she did with the taser was unreasonable and appropriate. Read the instruction about Mr. Stoughton's opinion.
Okay.
So are you doing in toto the state's proposal here? Are you substituting it all in? Or you just help me with what you're doing exactly at the top? I may have missed it, and I'm sorry to indulge.
Okay. I am adopting the state's proposed language, the introductory language. So it'll say use of non-deadly force. That's the title. In this case, you have heard testimony about whether the defendant's apparent decision to use a taser was reasonable or appropriate. And then the last sentence would be whether the defendant's apparent decision to use a taser was reasonable and appropriate is not a defense to the charges in this case. Right, 1 through 4. 1 through 4 is effectuating a lawful arrest, executing legal process, enforcing an order of the court, or executing any other duty imposed upon the officer by law. I mean, right under that, it says you are instructed that executing a lawful arrest warrant is a duty imposed on officers by law. Do you want additional language in there?
Executing legal process, enforcing order of the court. I mean, what we asked for was the statute, 609.06, in the language of the statute.
Okay, we can put okay, we'll put it, but all due respect. Okay, we'll put that back in. Okay, now, anything on 11? Yes.
So, I indicated before, I think, so it may not need repetition, but I will, just our continuing objection to have this instruction in at all. And I want to point out that we also, of course, have the objection to the hindsight language in the definition paragraph here, consistent with the court's other definition of it in the deadly force. And then, Your Honor, I should point out, that paragraph is different as well, just so we're all clear about this, in the first line, where in the deadly force instruction, it starts out saying, as to each count and defense. Right? So you see what I mean? In the deadly force instruction, that last paragraph starts out, as to each count or defense. I did not include that in the non-deadly force definition so that there wouldn't be any confusion when I go on to tell them this isn't a defense, right? I just want that clear. So that, and then, Your Honor, if we're going to if we're going to reinsert paragraphs 1 through 4, I would ask the court to take out arrest in the next sentence. You are instructed that executing a lawful arrest warrant. All the testimony in this case has been that it was a bench warrant or a warrant, and so to call it an arrest warrant, I think, it misstates it.
I just noticed, and I had a few of these. What we missed here, and I walked by, at the page 7, count 1 and count 2 both, at the end of there, if you find that each of these elements can prove beyond reasonable doubt, the defendant is guilty. If you find any element that has not been proven beyond reasonable doubt, the defendant is not guilty. In addition, if you find that the state failed to prove that reasonable force, give me the language for.
Once self-defense is raised, they have to prove it beyond reasonable. Prove she didn't act as self-defense beyond reasonable.
Yes. So that should be in here, because otherwise they say, well, the judge says if they prove these elements, he's guilty. But you got to warn them. Look at the self-defense or reasonable use of force instruction. That if the jury finds that there was reasonable use of force, they're not guilty. So you got to put in there that
once you raise the defense, they have to disprove it beyond
Right.
reasonable.
It is on page 10 at the top of the page.
my argument is with the last paragraph of count 1 and count 2, where you tell them if the elements are proven beyond reasonable doubt, the defendant is guilty. Unless the state, whatever. You have to put that in there that the state has the burden of proof to prove that reasonable force. What's the language? Tell me how.
Yeah, I'm sorry if I may. At the bottom of page 8 is when the court's instructions start talking about defenses, it plainly says Minnesota law provides that no crime is committed and the police officer's actions are justified. And then, of course, as the court pointed out, at the end of the instruction, it says they're not guilty of a crime.
Mm-hmm. So it's in there. You're covered. Okay. All right, let's go back. Let's go back to page 9, the last full paragraph. I'm wondering if the language that says as to each count or defense is confusing. Okay, leave that the way it is what the defense says, right? Okay. All right. I should have brought it up because everybody agrees, right? All right, where were we? Are we on page 11?
So I think we're all done with the non-deadly force. I did ask Your Honor to have the court remove arrest between lawful and warrant in the non-deadly force instruction.
You know what? I'm going to leave everything in there. You know, I just tried to make this a little bit easier for the jury, but if the defense wants it in there, I'm going to leave it in there. Okay, are we on 11? Anything on 11? Anything on 12? The implicit bias instruction is incorporated under duties of jurors. So 12 or 13? Okay. And did you have a chance to take a look at the verdict forms? Oh, okay. No objection to the verdict forms either, right?
They haven't changed at all since the last.
No. Okay. Here's what I'd like to do. First of all, yes. Oh, I like it when you raise your hand. Okay. He raised his hand first.
Before we transition out of jury instructions, the defense did request an instruction on policy, and we would like a ruling one way or another. The instruction that I requested via email, which I'd like to read into the record and get a ruling from you. Brooklyn Center police policies are not criminal statutes, period. An alleged violation of a policy is not a crime, period. And we requested that on December 14th, and the court deferred ruling. We do persist in requesting that, and if we would like a ruling one way or another from you at your leisure, but I do want to persist in that.
Okay, I forgot about that. Does the state object? I mean, it's true.
Yeah, it's true, but unnecessary. You're finding the crimes for them, and very specifically telling them to find them guilty, you have to find these elements. And that's just not necessary, potentially confusing to give them a specific instruction about policy.
Okay, I'm going to include it because it's true, and it's an accurate statement. Okay.
We had requested some language be added to the instruction because it's not incomplete. I mean, it's not complete. And I'm trying to remember the exact, I'm sorry, I don't have it in front of me, but but it can be considered in determining whether the defendant is guilty because that's also true. Right? It is evidence in the case. And so
I'm not going to talk about that. You can't consider that in determining whether she's guilty or not guilty. Plus, I don't know what we're arguing about. The Brooklyn Center policies are consistent with the law. So I'm not going to add that additional language, but where would you like that put in the jury? Where do you think it fits?
Right after page 5, after demonstrative charges are consistent.
Okay, we'll put it on page 5. Right after demonstrative evidence. Oh yeah, what's the title?
Following evaluation of policies.
Consideration of policies? Okay. Consideration of policies. Okay. I'll make the changes and recirculate another copy. We'll do it in 14 inch. Okay? So, and if you notice anything at all, any typos or anything, let me know by no later than 4 o'clock. Okay? And let's see. Oh, would the defense take the time, please, to look at the thumb drive on the computer that the state has? That because there's a computer, a laptop that's going to go to the jury room, right? And then there's that thumb drive with all the exhibits on it. So I want the defense to stay and look at all the exhibits so that you can confirm that all the exhibits that were entered are on the thumb drive. And check out the computer, the laptop, to make sure that it's clean of any other material. The laptop that goes back with the jurors will not have internet capability. Okay. And then tomorrow morning, I just want to put on the record that you've had enough time to look at that, look at the thumb drive exhibits to make sure that's appropriate, and that you've also had a chance to take a look at the laptop and make sure that it's appropriate to go back to the jury room. So we'll make a record of that tomorrow. And oh, that's okay. Oh yeah, we'll do it Monday. Okay, I misspoke. Okay, yeah.
I had just circulated an email to everybody about the 2 defense exhibits. We need to get electronic copies of those to put on the. Got that already?
I sent you our 2 electronic.
Did you?
Yep.
Okay. And then we try to keep track of all exhibits that were received, and I, of course, would like to think we are flawless at that, but I would rather seek some corroboration. So if the court has an exhibit list, I'd like to kind of cross-reference ours with theirs, with yours, and then once we do that, we can dump all that onto the electronic stuff we need.
Okay, yeah, Mr. Kramer's going to help you with that. Okay, what else? I think that's it. All right, counsel, I just want to tell you that I've really enjoyed having you. It was a really well-tried case on both sides.
Kept making those long objections.
You can't help yourself, can you, Mr. Gray? All right. Okay. Have a relaxing weekend if you can.
reported in the New York Times.
So I'm giving people a piece of myself.
But how am I doing so far?
Dante regularly at the hospital during that time period?
He was. He actually was able to feed him his first time with a. You'd have to feed him with a Q-tip. You would dip it in milk. So he was able to do that for his first feeding. And he visited often.
After Dante Jr., was Dante Jr. eventually released from the hospital?
He was.
Did your son Dante continue his relationship with Dante Jr.?
He did.
Tell the jury about that relationship, how you would see him and what they would do together.
He was very proud to be a father. He was also a worried dad just because he was premature about him sleeping, and because he did sleep a lot as a premature baby, and he was really worried about that. He would play with him. He would do everything that a father needs to do for his child. He was an amazing dad.
So, Ms. Bryant, and take your time, please. But I'm going to ask you some questions about April 11th of this year, okay? Could you tell the jury what you were doing that day?
I had Dante Jr. He stayed the night, and it was just an average day. We woke up, he ate, he liked his favorite, is the mini chocolate chip pancakes, and he was eating breakfast, watching Cocomelon, and it was time for his nap. That was around 12 something that afternoon.
And did you end up were you watching Dante Jr. By yourself for part of that day?
Yes.
And then did you end up seeing your son Dante later on in the day?
I did.
Could you describe that interaction for the jury, please?
Dante came home in the afternoon, and I was laying Dante Jr. down at the time. He knocked on the bedroom door, and he asked for $50 because he wanted to go get a car wash, and he said he needed gas. And I told him to be really quiet, take it out of my purse. So he took it out of the purse, he leaned over the bed, he gave Dante Jr. a kiss goodbye, and I yelled at him again and told him, please don't wake him up, like I just got him to sleep. And then he left. I told him to make sure he locks the door on his way out.
So you indicated that your son Dante Wright was on his way to get a car wash and had gotten some money from you for that. What was the car that your son Dante Wright was driving?
A white 2011 Buick LaCrosse.
Was that Dante's car?
Yes.
And how did that come to be?
It was one of our older vehicles. It was in my other son's name, but we ended up giving it to him as his first car, like 2 weeks before he was killed.
And when you say giving it to him, was he the only one who was driving the car in that 2-week period?
Yeah, he was the only one that had access, that he had a key to the car. It was his.
But was the car still registered to your other son?
It was still registered to my son Dallas. Yes, it was still registered to Dallas.
And what about the insurance on that car?
We did not transfer over insurance yet, so we were going to add it to our current insurance policy.
But that hadn't been done yet?
No.
On April 11th, did you go into that car, have any interaction with Dante in that car?
No, I did not.
And had you been in that car or driven that car, used that car in that 2-week period prior?
No, I have not.
Okay. So getting back to April 11th, after Dante, your son Dante Wright took money to get a car wash, what happened after that?
He called probably about 10 minutes after he left the house, and he asked me what car wash we usually go to, because we have a specific car wash that we go to in Fridley off of University. And I told him that, and he was like, well, isn't there one in Brooklyn Park? And I said, well, yeah, I think it's Mr. Car Wash. And he said he was going to go to that car wash. And I said, okay, don't call back again, because I was really adamant about Junior not waking up.
It was Junior. Is Junior what you call Dante's son, Dante Jr.?
Yes, Dante Jr.
And was your concern just not waking up Junior?
Yes, not waking Junior up.
So after that call where you discussed which car wash to go to, was there a second call after that?
There was.
And about how much later was that?
Oh my gosh, maybe 10, 15 minutes later.
And what was the nature of that second call?
He called me to tell me that he has been pulled over. And I asked him, I said, for what? And he said that the police officer said that he had an air freshener hanging from his rearview mirror. So at that time I told him, I said, well, you should take it down. And he said he already did. And then he said that they were also asking about insurance information. And I told him to, when the police officer gets back to the window, to please hand him the phone so I can explain the insurance and give him my insurance policy that we haven't added it yet.
When you talked to your son, Dante, how did he sound to you during that call?
He sounded nervous, scared. He asked, if he was in trouble. I said, no, you haven't done anything wrong. And he just sounded really nervous. But I reassured him that it would be okay.
Take your time. When he placed these calls to you, how were you receiving these calls? Was it through a cell phone network or some other way?
It was through Facebook Messenger. It was voice calls. He didn't have phone service at the time, so he was calling through Facebook Messenger.
And so after you had this initial conversation with your son, Dante, about wanting to talk to the officers, what happened after that?
I heard the police officer come back up to the window and he asked Dante to step out of the vehicle. And Dante asked, for what? Am I in trouble? And I heard the officer say, I need you to just put the phone down, step out of the vehicle, and I'll let you know as soon as you step out of the vehicle. And then at that time, I heard the phone either being placed on an object, whether it was, dropped on the floor or placed on the dash, I'm not sure, but I could hear the phone being put down. And then I heard the officer telling Dante, no. And I heard Dante say, no, I'm not. Don't. It sounded like he said, don't run. Dante said, no, I'm not. And then I heard them say, somebody tell somebody to hang up the phone. And then that's all I heard.
Did the phone disconnect?
It did.
After the phone disconnected, then you heard what you described. What happened next?
I was panicked. I called back. It seemed like 100 times, but I believe it was probably maybe 4 or 5 times, and I kept calling. So finally, I FaceTimed. I would say I don't know how much time lapsed, maybe a minute or two. And then a female answered the phone because it was FaceTime. She was screaming. And I was like, what's wrong? And she said that they shot him. And she faced the phone towards the driver's seat. And my son was laying there. He was unresponsive, and he looked dead. And then I heard somebody say, hang up the phone again, and it disconnected again.
So after that phone call disconnected, or you said it was a video call at that point, so you got to see your son Dante. What did you do after that video call?
I grabbed my grandson and I called my husband because he wasn't home. They said they just shot Dante. And he said, what? And he said that they just shot him. And I said they just shot him. The police officer just shot Dante. They have no clue where they are. And I hung up with him. And then I called 911 because I needed to find out where my son was.
And did you in fact make that call to 911?
I did.
What did you learn when you made that call?
They transferred me to a few different police stations. I said, my son was just shot by a police officer and I need to know where he is. And they transferred me to, I think it was Brooklyn Park or Brooklyn Center, that I don't remember which police station or which 911 operator answered. But they gave me an address of 63rd and Catherine. And I put it in my GPS, and I grabbed my grandson, and I got into my vehicle, and my neighbors heard me screaming because I like fell to the ground because I was just, I didn't know what to do. So she helped me up. She put us into the vehicle, and then she drove us to 63rd and Catherine in Brooklyn Center.
A neighbor who drove you and Dante Jr.?
Yes.
And about how long did it take for you to get to that location?
Oh, it seemed like forever. I felt like we weren't getting there fast enough, but probably 7-8 minutes, maybe a little bit longer.
And is that where you went to that location at 63rd and Catherine?
Yes.
And what did you see when you got there?
So we were driving down Brooklyn Boulevard, coming up to 63rd, and there was a lot of traffic, a lot. So I got out of the car because I could see, when we were waiting to turn, I could see all the police lights, probably about 6 blocks down. And I got out of the car and I started running towards Catherine because the traffic wasn't moving fast enough. And then the car that I was in ended up catching up with me, and I got back in for another 2 blocks. And then I got out again and ran the last 2 blocks to where all the yellow tape was. And then I went under the yellow tape because I seen a car crash, and I noticed it was my son's car. And then in the front of his car is where he was laying.
Did you see your son's body on the ground?
I did.
So what did you do when you got to that area?
I was so distraught. I didn't know what was happening. I just got off the phone and they said he shot him, but I seen a car crash. I was asking questions. I didn't want to believe that was my son laying there on the ground, but I could tell it was him because of his tennis shoes.
And when you say you could tell it was him because of his tennis shoes, was it only part of his body that was visible to you?
They had a white sheet over him.
But you recognized his shoes?
Yeah.
Your Honor, at this time I would offer Exhibit 6. Again, I understand that there's no foundational objection to that exhibit.
And what is Exhibit 6?
It's a video of Ms. Bryant arriving on scene.
Okay. Is it no objection? Exhibit 6 will be admitted into evidence. This will be admitted into evidence, and you may publish, counsel.
Thank you.
I don't know anything. Who are you? I am Katie Bryant, his mom. I want to see you. No, please. We don't have 20. I don't know what's going on. I know what's going on. What happened? He faced up one. Man, I'm going to get you somebody to talk to. I'm going to get you someone to talk to. Okay? But I just can't have you going over there right now, okay? My name is Mike. My name is Mark. What is your name? Can I have you sit on the bench here? You guys shot him. Why? I don't know. I wasn't here. Why? Because he had a warrant. Are you fucking serious? I was here. I watched it. Can you sit down? Tell me what's going on, because I wasn't here. No. Where's the girl that was in the car with him? You guys made her hang up Facebook Live so you could kill my son. That's pretty pathetic. What is your name? What is your name? My name is Katie Bryant. My son's name is Dante Wright. You guys already know that. I don't. Katie Bryant. It was a high-speed chase? Bryant? How? And then what's your son's name? Dante Wright. It was not a high-speed chase. You guys shot him in a pole over traffic. I didn't know anything, man. Yeah, you did. He was laying in his front seat dead. His girlfriend Facebooked me. How did his car get smashed? What's his name again? Dante Wright. Wright? Is it W-R-I-G-H? W-I-G-H-T. Okay. Is it Katie? Yeah. Bryant. Yeah. All right. Just wait a second here, ma'am. You just sit down, please. Ma'am? You sit down. Okay, so I wasn't here. You said there was a traffic stop and they shot him? They pulled him over, and he said, Mom, we have a warrant. I said, oh, no. They asked him to get out of the car. He got out of the car, and they said, wait, stop. They said, stop. And then she goes, and then they shot him, and he fell back in the seat. And he was in the driver's seat. And she saw that they shot him. And I said, what do you mean they shot him? She said, yeah. And then they told her to hang up. And that was it. I don't know nothing else. So I had to call you guys to find out where this happened. I really don't know more because I just came because I heard there was trouble. Why is my car smashed up? I don't know. This deputy here wasn't, we weren't here. I'm alive. I do not know the condition. Are you guys serious? What are you talking to me for then? I'm gonna find out. We're gonna find out, but we have to wait and find out who's involved and who's in charge and get you in contact with the people that know what's going on. So I can tell them who I'm talking to. I'm gonna start exchanging. We are also trying to figure out what's going on.
Stop. Thank you.
Evolve your business with 4 times membership rewards points on your top 2 select spending categories.
Ms. Bryant, I know that was tough to watch. Can you just describe for the jury what you were feeling when you arrived on scene?
I was afraid that it was him laying on the ground, that it was the person in the other car, and then he was in the back of a cop car. I was so confused, angry, scared. It was the worst day of my life, and
You said that you were praying that it wasn't him, but in your heart, having recognized those shoes, did you feel like you knew?
I knew, but I didn't want to know. I was biting the insides of my cheeks. I still have scars on the insides of my cheeks because I thought it was a dream. That if I bit the insides of my cheeks, that I would wake up. But I didn't wake up.
You know, in the video you described that you were there and that you watched it. What did you mean by that?
That when I FaceTimed back while I was on the phone prior, so I heard the conversation between the officer and Dante before he had to get out of the car, and that after, when I FaceTimed the female that was in the car, I could see what happened, and she said what happened, that she was shot by the police officer that was there at the time.
That he was shot, your son Dante?
My son Dante was shot, yes.
And you had mentioned, I think, Facebook Live, but is that video call, the FaceTime or video messenger call that you are describing?
Yes, Messenger Live.
About how long did you stay in that area after this?
Hours, 8, 9 hours. I felt like I couldn't leave until because I begged them to take his body off the ground. I didn't want to leave until he left.
At some point, did your husband join you as well?
He did.
And did someone come to pick up Dante Jr., your grandson who was with you?
Yes, China ended up coming to get him.
You said that you waited on scene until they removed your son Dante's body. Were you ever given an opportunity to approach or see him close up on that day?
No, I wasn't.
Excuse me, I objected as
The objections are removed. You may answer.
No, I wasn't able to approach him at all.
And what was going through your head while you were waiting for all those hours?
That I wanted to go comfort my baby. I wanted to hold him. And I wanted to protect him because that's what mothers do. You protect your children. You make sure that they're safe.
Thank you, Your Honor. Nothing further. May we have a brief sidebar?
Yes. Okay, Mr. Gray?
Good afternoon, Mrs. Bryant. I have a few questions. With respect to the automobile, the Buick, it was in Dallas's name, is that right?
Yes.
And how long had it been in Dallas's name?
For a few years since we've owned it.
Now, remember how many years by we owned it, would that be you?
Well, yes, I drove it in the beginning, like years ago when we purchased it.
Okay.
But my son ended up putting it in his name after that.
And how old is Dallas?
Dallas is 24.
All right, so he'd be 3, 4 years older than your son?
Yes.
And you testified that you're close to your son, is that right?
I'm close to all my children, yes.
Okay, but you also testified that you're close to your son, correct?
Yes.
All right. And at that time, did you have car insurance on this Buick?
We did not.
All right. And with respect to your son, Dante, did you know whether or not he had a driver's license?
Did know that he did not have a driver's license.
You knew he didn't have one, correct?
Yep.
And you knew his license was suspended, correct?
I did not know that.
Well, did he ever have a driver's license?
No.
So he's 20 years old with no driver's license, fair statement?
Yep.
And were you also aware of his marijuana usage?
I was not.
Did you ever go inside the Buick while he had it parked at your house?
I did not.
And did you know that he had a warrant for his arrest?
I did not.
How did you know when you ran up to the police that he had a warrant? You said, my son was shot for a warrant.
Because that's what somebody on the side of the street said when I was running up to them.
You know who said that?
I don't know. There's a lot of people out there that day.
And you testified that Dante was staying at your house?
He was.
The 2 weeks prior to his death, was he staying there every night?
Not every night.
And how many nights of the 2 weeks before that did he actually stay at your house?
If I had to give an estimate, probably 4 or 5 nights out of the week.
And with respect to his girlfriend, how long was he dating her, did you know?
Only for a few weeks.
A week?
A few weeks.
Or 2 weeks? Or was it a few weeks?
To give an estimate, a few. I'm not sure.
Did you ever meet her?
I did not personally meet her, no.
And when he arrived at your house that day, he wanted $50 for gas and a car wash, correct?
Correct.
And she did not come into the house with him, correct?
She did not.
You gave a statement to law enforcement on April 15th, 2021. Do you remember that?
I do.
And have you reviewed that statement before you came to testify today?
I did.
And it is true, is it not, that when you went to that statement, you had 3 lawyers, or 2 lawyers at least, actually 3 lawyers, that represented you at the time. Is that correct?
Objection, Your Honor. Outside scope and relevant.
Okay, sidebar, please.
It's a great day to help people customize and save with Liberty Mutual. Whoa.
We stayed a whole week with our father. Her said no. Yes.
Hey, you little fucking rascal. I ain't say shit to you, so don't be sitting here starting. Y'all is real drama. Y'all is some drama. They is drama. Drama.
That's not what I said. Oh, no, liars. I didn't.
Okay, any objection is overruled.
On April 15th, 2021, Ms. Bryant, you were interviewed by law enforcement, and you had an attorney named Jeff Storms representing you, correct?
Correct.
And you had an attorney named Adam Marceline with the Ben Krupp Law Firm, is that right?
Yes.
And you had another attorney, Christopher Scott, with Newmark and Storms, is that right?
Yes.
And those are the three lawyers that were representing you back then?
Yes.
And you were contemplating a civil lawsuit?
Yes.
That's all I have, Your Honor. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. You may step down. The state may call its next witness.
Thank you, Your Honor. The state would call Officer Anthony Lucky.
What are y'all doing to her? Get up here, y'all round.
Please come forward and
Make you
stand
some
behind the
pizza.
witness
Here,
chair.
you get up here. Get up here. Here, make it.
Do you swear under penalty of perjury that you will truthfully respond to questions?
I do.
Please have a seat. And officer, you may remove your mask and state your full name and spell it.
First name will be Anthony Troy Lucky, Anthony. Middle name Troy. Last name Luckey.
Just a couple of reminders, only one person can talk at a time. Wait until the question's finished before you answer. If an objection is made, stop talking immediately and don't answer the question unless I tell you to. Okay, if you don't understand the question, ask for clarification, all right?
Yes.
And yes or no answers, please, instead of shaking your head.
Yes.
Counsel?
Thank you, Your Honor. Good afternoon, officer. The cautions the judge just gave you, if you catch me trying to correct you, that's just why, so we can get all your testimony down, okay?
Should I ask you to spell your full name?
Yes, you did.
Okay.
Thank you, Your Honor. Obviously, you're dressed in uniform today. Can you tell the jurors what you do for a living?
So for a living, I am a police officer with the Brooklyn Center Police Department, and I've been employed there since February 2021.
And was it your first job as a police officer?
My first employment as a police officer, it will be technically my third employment as a police officer.
So how long have you worked as a police officer altogether?
Altogether, it would be about a total of 3 years.
And we'll come back to that and cover that a little bit more, but I want to
Yes.
back up a little bit. How old are you today?
I am 31 years old.
And can you tell the jurors, just not address, but the town where you grew up?
I grew up in Brooklyn Park, Minnesota.
And you now work Brooklyn Center, correct?
Brooklyn Park, Brooklyn Center, both the same areas. So yeah.
The cities share a border even, right?
Correct.
And where did you go to high school?
I attended Park Center Senior High School.
And is that kind of a shared with Brooklyn Park and Brooklyn Center?
There is a Brooklyn Center High School, and there is a Brooklyn Park High School. So some people who did live in Brooklyn Center also attended Park Center High School as well. So
When did you first start thinking about becoming a police officer?
I thought about becoming a police officer when I was about 7, 8 years old, living in the city of Brooklyn Park.
And why? What made you start thinking about it?
For me, it was just living in the community, seeing how crime was going on in Brooklyn Park, seeing how officers for the Brooklyn Park Police Department responded to calls and helped the community. So for me, it was always a calling, wanting to help other people, wanted to do good in the world.
And you could do that by being a police officer.
Yes.
And so what was your first experience working with the police department?
My first experience would have been with a smaller agency up north in Mille Lacs County, Band of Ojibwe Police Department. Very fast-paced, good agency. Fortunate for me, I moved on.
Let me back you up just a little bit, because I was going to go even farther back than that.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, because you didn't work for the law enforcement agency, but volunteered, right? You were an explorer.
Oh, correct, yes.
Okay.
Going backwards, yes. Growing up, when I was 15, I started as a police explorer with the Brooklyn Center Police Department. And I continued to do that until I was 18 in 2008.
And so when you were an explorer, what kinds of things did you do?
So as an explorer, it's kind of like a youth program where it is a youth program where you learn the basic ways of being in law enforcement. So you learn what it is like doing the job. You compete in competitions such as crime scene investigations, traffic stops, and so on. So every year you would do a competition. Back in the day it was Breezy Point Resort up north in Minnesota, and you would compete against other agencies as well.
Did you enjoy it?
I did, yes.
Did it make you want to be a police officer more or less?
Yes, it gave me the wanting to drive to continue my career and to continue becoming a police officer.
While you were an explorer for the Brooklyn Center Police Department, did you get to know Kim Potter?
Yes, I did.
How so?
I did see Officer Potter around in the building when we would have monthly meetings. There were times that I would see her coming into our meetings every now and then. I would see her in passing while we're doing trainings and stuff like that.
So you knew who she was?
Yes.
And were there ever, did you have much involvement with her? It was just seeing her around?
It was obviously, getting to know the officers in the agency. A lot of the officers, commanders, chiefs that are currently there were present when I was an explorer. So coming and passing and, saying hi, a lot of them would come and introduce themselves. Even some would help out with police explorers as well, being role players.
And did you recall whether Officer Potter at the time did that?
I don't recall specifically with Officer Potter, but I do just recall seeing her a lot around at the agency.
So that's while you were a teenager, correct?
Correct, yes.
So then, I assume at some point you graduated from high school, correct?
Yes, 2008.
And tell us then, what was your next step in education to be a police officer?
So my next step was to go to college, which I did. I attended Alexandria Technical College for a year, which was up north. I decided to move back down to the cities where I continued classes at North Hennepin Technical College, and then I transferred over to Rasmussen College where I completed my degree in law enforcement and also did classes for a 4-year degree as well.
And so you have to help us here. Do you end up with a 2-year degree or 4-year degree? How does that work?
I did complete my 2-year degree.
Okay. And that's all that's required, at least by Brooklyn Center at the time, correct?
Yes.
And so that's what you needed to do for your education to be a police officer?
Yes.
And also a skills program that you have to do to be a police officer?
Yes. So when you do your 2-year degree or your 4, there is a skills program that you do go through, and that is more of the not necessarily the book work, but it's the hands-on work. So firearms training, use of force, crime scene investigations, the more of the fun stuff. You go to driving school, etc. So.
And so then the next, I think you started telling us earlier, the first job you got in law enforcement was where?
So the first job I was ever hired with was Mille Lacs Tribal Police Department, Band of Ojibwe, and that was up north in Minnesota.
And how long did you work there?
I was employed there for a total of 3 months.
And did you do a field training officer program there?
Yes, I did have a field training program there as well.
So since you're the first officer to take the stand in the case, could you just explain for the jurors basically what a field training officer program is?
Yes. So a field training program, initially when you are hired with the police department in the state of Minnesota, you go through a program of working with a officer. Typically, there's 4 phases. Your first phase is basically learning on a ride-along, learning how they do, traffic stops, how they handle calls, how they deal with people, sort of getting a feel for the geography and the basics of starting on the road. It's basically getting you ready to be able to work in that city's environment, if that makes sense. Gradually down the road, moving on through these phases, you get switched different field training officers that will give you an understanding of how they do things differently and their experiences as well. And with that moving on through the field training phases, you are expected to be able to show and prove that you can do the job on your own.
And so at some point you left the Mille Lacs Tribal Police Department, correct?
Yes.
And why was that?
Due to an issue with my training with geography, I was let go.
Okay. So, and by geography, you mean learning the jurisdiction?
Correct, yes.
When you get a call to a place, you got to know where to go.
Correct, yes, which is important.
Yeah. And so then where did you work after that?
So after that, I was hired with the city of Gaylord in Sibley County, July of 2019, where I went through the same field training program and stayed there until February of 2021.
And how big is the city of Gaylord when you were working there?
The city of Gaylord is about 3,500 people.
And so with the Gaylord Police Department, did you go through a field training officer program there as well?
Yes.
And did you complete that program there?
Yes.
And then you mentioned in February of this year you changed jobs, correct?
Correct, yes.
And so where did you go in February of this year?
February of this year, 2021, I applied for the Brooklyn Center Police Department, which was the agency where I've always wanted to work. I went through the hiring process, background process, psych evaluation, and a physical agility test, and got hired with Brooklyn Center Police Department, I believe February 16th of 2021.
Why did you want to apply at the Brooklyn Center Police Department?
For me, it's personal. The reason why with Brooklyn Center Police Department and the city itself is just because I grew up there all my life. I know the type of, the community, the people that live in that community. The streets of Brooklyn Center, Brooklyn Park, basically being home.
Did you think you could succeed as a police officer there?
Yes.
And you're still currently employed there, correct?
Yes, I am currently employed.
Now, you are licensed as a police officer in Minnesota?
Yes.
And again, since you're kind of the first police officer, can you just describe, well, what is the licensing authority for police officers?
You mean the Minnesota Post part? Is that what you're referring to?
Yep, where do you get your license from?
Yep. When you are licensed as a police officer, you are licensed with the Minnesota Police Boards Association, which is the Minnesota Post Board, which is our licensing center, or our licensing issuers basically in the state of Minnesota.
And so HOST, I think, means Peace Officer Standards and Training, right?
Correct.
And so you have to apply there to get your license, meet certain requirements before they can give you a license, correct?
Yes.
And when did you first obtain your police officer license in Minnesota?
My first obtaining of a license was January of 2018.
And you've kept that license ever since?
No. The license did go inactive. So every time you move an agency, my license was activated the January of 2018. Moved over to transferred to Gaylord Police Department, where it was then reactivated, and then I was having my license held through that agency.
So when all the time you've been working as a police officer, you've had an active post license?
Yes.
And when you worked at the Gaylord Police Department, did they provide training to you?
Yes.
And did you carry a taser there?
Yes.
And did you get certified to carry the taser before carrying it?
Yes.
And do you recall what model taser you used when you were at Gaylord?
At the City of Gaylord Police Department, it was, I believe, the X26P.
And when you went to the Brooklyn Center Police Department, did you get a taser to carry there when you started?
Yes.
And at some point, did the Brooklyn Center Police Department change models of taser?
Yes, at one point they did. When I started, it was X26P.
And what did they change to?
And then we transitioned to the Taser 7.
And when you were at Brooklyn Center, did you have to do some training for the Taser 7?
Yes.
Do you recall when that training was?
Not the exact date. I do want to say it was the first week of May. I believe probably May 3rd or May 7th.
Okay. Do you think it was March?
Sorry, yeah, March. Sorry, yeah, March.
Yeah.
March 3rd would be actually the exact date.
Okay. And did you also get training like on the use of force with Gaylord?
Yes.
And the use of force with Brooklyn Center as well?
Yes.
And did that training, through that training, were you taught about different ways to, or places to wear the taser?
Yes.
When you came to Brooklyn Center, was there already a policy in place about where to carry your taser?
Yes.
And what was that policy?
The policy was opposite side of your duty firearm.
So if you have your duty firearm on your right side, you had to carry your taser on the left side?
Yes.
Why was that there was a rule about that?
For Taser's policy and our policy, it's so that way officers do not get their firearms confused with their tasers.
And when you were wearing your taser for the Brooklyn Center Police Department, you wore it on the other side, correct?
Yes.
Did you use a straight draw or cross draw? Do you know what I mean?
When I first started, I used a cross draw.
And what does that mean? Can you describe that for the jurors, please?
Yes, so a cross draw is I'm a right-handed person. I carry my Glock 17 on my right side. So when I go for my taser, to grab my taser, I reach across my waist on the other side of my belt, and I am able to grab my taser with my right hand, which would be my dominant hand.
And so if you were to grab it with the other hand, what kind of draw is that called?
And if I use the opposite hand, it would be a reaction side straight draw.
And are you still wearing it that way?
I currently am wearing a straight draw with my reaction side.
So you've switched.
Well, yeah, yes, with my reaction side hand.
Why did you switch?
For me, that's just how I train with, is to just use my taser with my left hand only instead of my dominant hand.
So, for some time you wore it as a cross draw, right?
Yes.
And then at some point you switched to a straight draw.
Correct.
And why did you? I'm not sure I'm clear about why you switched at that point to a straight draw.
Yeah, so initially when I did start at Brooklyn Center Police Department, I do believe there was a straight draw holster offered to me. Down the road, I didn't prefer to have a cross draw, so I requested it to obtain a straight draw holster, but it was not available. So when we transitioned to the Taser 7, I made sure to stick with using a cross draw holster instead on my left side.
When you went to the Taser 7, you requested a straight draw or a cross draw?
Straight draw holster, yes.
So that's where the switch occurred?
Yes.
All right. Sorry if I beat that, but wanted to make sure I understood. And when you were working at Gaylord Police Department, did you ever have to draw your taser?
Yes.
And what about at Brooklyn Center? Did you ever draw your taser while you were working at Brooklyn Center?
Yes.
And have you ever actually fired a taser?
No.
When you were working both in Gaylord and for Brooklyn Center, and part of the training that you went through on your taser, did you have to perform draws of the taser?
Yes.
Can you describe that for the jurors, please?
The use of force training that we do with Brooklyn Center Police Department is when we go through the taser training, we go through a PowerPoint for a period or amount of time, and then we do hands-on training with the tasers that we carry on duty. So with that being said, we do get some targets. We practice deploying cartridges at these targets, aiming for the target areas. Sometimes, or not sometimes, when I first initially started, it was, doing a little bit of running, jumping, getting the blood pumping, and then deploying this taser at the target.
What's the point of making you run and jump and get the blood flowing?
Just to get the body used to and trained with being under stress while taking out your taser and deploying it.
And you did that training, did you say at Brooklyn Center?
Yes.
So when you came to Brooklyn Center, you started a field training program there, correct?
Yes.
Did you also have to do some training separate from the other officers because you were new?
Yes, and that would have been pre-service training.
Okay. And is that where you did this type of taser training?
Yes.
And do you understand now as a Brooklyn Center police officer that type of training where they get you to think under pressure is something that all officers go through?
That is something that all officers should go through and do, yes.
And was that true when you were at Gaylord as well?
We did do the same type of taser training. I do not believe we did any agility, running or jumping.
I want to turn specifically to now April 11th of 2021. Were you working that day?
Yes.
And what was your shift that day?
So my shift